Today we're going to be going over 5 unsettling Reddit confessions. Make sure to drop some support if you guys do enjoy these videos. Drop a like, subscribe to the channel. We are trying to hit that goal of 1,000 followers by the end of December. And let me know which story you guys enjoy most. Let's get right into it. I've been carrying this with me for over a decade now. It's like the weight on my chest that I try to forget about, but it never goes away. Not really at all. No matter how many years pass or how many times I tell myself it wasn't my fault, I know deep down that it was. I grew up in a small town where pretty much everyone was connected. Jamie and I met in kindergarten and we became fast friends. We did everything together. Sleepovers, riding bikes around the neighborhood, exploring the woods behind our houses. It was one of those childhood friendships where you just assume the other person would always be in your life. In high school, things didn't change much. Sure, we had our different interests. I was into video games, Jamie was into sports, but we always made time to hang out with each other. He was more popular than me, no doubt about that. He was the funny, athletic guy that everyone liked, and I was the quieter one who kind of stuck to a smaller group. But that never mattered to Jamie. He always made me feel included, like I was his number one friend. No matter how many other friends he had, I was always the guy that he went to. After high school, we both stayed local, going to a community college to save money before transferring to the bigger schools. We'd still hang out almost every weekend, usually doing the same things we did as kids. One of our favorite activities was camping. We didn't even need much, just a tent, couple sleeping bags, a 6-pack of beer, and a campfire. It was our way of, getting away from everything and the stresses of college. One weekend, out of nowhere, Jamie called me up and said, hey, let's do a camping trip just like the old times. I didn't have any plans, so I was all in. We packed up the car and we drove to the spot that we'd been to a dozen times before. It was up in the mountains about half an hour away from our house, so it wasn't too far of a drive. It wasn't anything special, just a quiet clearing in the woods where we could set up our tent and sit by the fire and talk. The night started out perfect. We cracked open a couple beers, roasted some hot dogs over the fire, and talked about everything that, college kids talk about. Work, girls, the average problems that we have in our lives as well. Jamie was seeing someone new, some girl that he'd met at a bar a few weeks ago. He seemed pretty into her, which was surprising because Jamie wasn't really the relationship type. He joked about how she, might be the one to finally settle him down, but we both laughed, even though a part of me wondered if he was actually being serious. As the night went on, we both got a little buzzed, but nothing crazy. Around midnight, we decided to pack in and head to the tent. I don't know how long I was asleep. Maybe an hour, maybe less, when I heard Jamie whispering my name. At first I thought he was messing with me. He was always the prankster trying to freak me out during our camping trips. But when I rolled over to look at him, I could definitely see that something was wrong. Jamie was lying on his back, clutching his chest, and his face was white and the guy was drenched in sweat. He muttered to me, "Dude, I don't feel good." I sat up now, pretty concerned for my friend, and I said, "What's going on? Are you having a panic attack or something?" He just shook his head and his breathing was really shallow now. "I don't know, my chest, it hurts. I can't breathe." At that moment, I didn't know what to do. This was Jamie, the guy that was always healthy, always full of life. He'd literally never been sick a day in his life. A heart attack? That couldn't be happening, not to a guy as healthy as him. I fumbled for my phone trying to call 911, but we were deep in the mountains and there was no signal unless you walked in another mile or so. I tried again and again, but nothing, no signal at all. Meanwhile, Jamie's condition was getting worse. He was gasping for air and his face was contorted with pain. He looked at me and I could tell that he had this deep fear emitting in his eyes. I'll never forget the way he whispered, "Please help me." I didn't know how long I sat there, just paralyzed by my fear and just being scared. Minutes felt like hours and all I could think about was, this isn't happening. This can't be happening. I kept telling him to hang on and that I was trying to get help, but deep down I knew I should have done more. I should have thrown him to the car and driven him to the nearest hospital, but I didn't because I was too scared. Jamie stopped moving after what felt like forever. His chest stopped rising and falling, and his eyes eventually fluttered shut. I shook him, screamed his name, tried to wake him up, but he was gone. I sat there in the cold, silent night, holding my dead best friend, and all I could think about was I let him die. When the sun finally started to rise, I managed to drive to the nearest ranger station. The paramedics arrived a few hours later, but it was obviously too late. They said it was a heart attack, probably caused by a genetic condition that no one knew about. He wouldn't have survived if we even gone to the hospital sooner. I mean, that's what they told me, but I don't believe it. I know I could have saved him. I should have done more. I should have tried harder to get help. I should have been there for him when he needed me the most. Instead, I froze. I let fear take over, and now he's gone. I've tried to move on. I went back to school, got a degree, found a decent job, but every night when I close my eyes, I still see his face begging for help. I don't expect forgiveness, and I know I honestly don't deserve it, but maybe telling this story will help me carry the weight a little easier. Or maybe it won't. I don't know. All I know is that I'll never forgive myself for letting my best friend die. I can still hear the echo of my decision years later. It's one of those things that festers in the back of your mind, gnawing at you every time you think you've managed to push it aside. I know I ruined a man's life, and worse, I did it on purpose, and there's really no coming back from that. Back when I was 23, fresh out of college and eager to start my professional life, I landed a job at a big marketing firm. It wasn't my dream job, but it was a solid stepping stone to where I wanted to be in the future. I was bright-eyed and determined to climb the ladder, but at the same time, I was super insecure and I desperately wanted approval from my peers. That's where Alex came in. He'd been working at the company for a few years, and everyone really seemed to like this guy. He was charming, outgoing, and frankly a bit of a flirt. He didn't seem interested in office politics, just in being liked as a person. When he started showing me some attention, I took it as a compliment. He was older, more experienced, and confident in a way I wasn't. It felt really good to, get this validation from someone who worked at the same company as me. At first it was harmless. We'd chat during breaks, grab lunch together, and text occasionally. But after a few weeks, things took a turn. Alex started texting me more frequently, sometimes at odd hours. He'd show up at my desk for no apparent reason, lingering in conversations that didn't need to happen at all. It was subtle at first, but soon enough, it kind of became suffocating. I couldn't go a day without feeling like he was hovering around me, just waiting to find the right opportunity to say something. One night after a company event, we were all out drinking. I don't know if it was the alcohol or just the tension that had been building, but Alex tried to kiss me outside while we were waiting for a cab. I was caught off guard and pushed him away, but he didn't seem to get the message. He laughed it off, muttering something about how I played hard to get. I didn't say anything back to him, and I didn't want to make a scene, especially because he was drunk. But after that, things escalated. He started showing up in my apartment unannounced. The first time, he claimed he was in the neighborhood and thought we could hang out. I let him in, not wanting to seem rude, but the whole time I really just felt trapped. It wasn't long before he tried to kiss me again. This time, I flat out told him that I wasn't interested. He seemed surprised, even offended, but he eventually left my house. For the next few weeks, his behavior got worse. He would text me constantly, even during meetings. He'd wait outside the office, ask if I wanted to get dinner, and I'd always find some excuse to tell him no. My anxiety skyrocketed. I started to dread going to work, knowing that he'd be there watching me the whole time. I told a few coworkers about it, but they kind of brushed it off. He's just being friendly, they said. He really likes you. But it didn't feel like that. It felt like invasive. Creepy is the better word. I considered going to HR, but I was worried about making things awkward in the office. I didn't want to be that person who stirred up drama, especially since Alex was so well liked, so I just decided to stay quiet. Then one day I just snapped. I had just gotten off a phone call with a big client when Alex popped up at my desk asking if I wanted to grab lunch. I tried to brush him off, but he wouldn't take no for an answer. He kept pressing, making jokes about how I was too busy for him now, how we used to be friends. Something inside me just broke. I stormed into HR and I told them everything, how he'd been stalking me, harassing me, making me feel unsafe. I laid it all out, sparing no details at all. It didn't take long for HR to take action. Alex was suspended pending an investigation, and then a few days later he was fired. Just like that, I felt a strange mix of relief and guilt. I knew I had exaggerated things, yes. He had crossed the line many times, but I made it sound much worse than it really was. But I was angry. I was tired of feeling powerless, and I used the only power that I had. After Alex was fired, word spread out around the office. People started treating me differently, like I was fragile, like I needed protecting almost. I absolutely hated it. And Alex, well, his life went downhill pretty fast. He couldn't find another job in marketing. His reputation was absolutely ruined now. I heard from a mutual friend that he had tried to move back in with his parents and take odd jobs to get by. I should have felt vindicated, but I really didn't. Every time I thought about him, I just felt sick. I destroyed his career, his future, over what? Some uncomfortable conversations? A kiss I didn't want? He wasn't a monster, just a guy that didn't know how to read signals. I knew I could have handled it differently. I could have set firmer boundaries and made it clear to him that I really wasn't interested, but I didn't. Instead, I let my anger and fear take over, and I really ruined his life. I don't know where Alex is now, and I haven't spoken to him since the day that he was fired. Part of me wants to apologize and admit what I did, but I'm too much of a coward. I know he'll never forgive me, and honestly I don't deserve it. I don't expect anyone to forgive me. I don't even think I forgive myself. This is the kind of thing that no one should ever know. I mean, I've lived my whole life with this secret, and if anyone ever found out, I think I'd be done for. No one in their right mind would forgive me for what I did. Hell, I don't even forgive myself. Every day I wake up, I think about it. Every night when I try to sleep, it's there. I can't shake it no matter how hard I try. It was about 5 years ago. My little brother Jack was only 7 at the time. He was always full of energy, always bouncing off the walls, always following me around like a shadow. I was 17 then and in my senior year of high school, and I was over it, all of it. The constant babysitting, the responsibility, I really just wanted to be left alone. One weekend, my parents had decided to take a trip out of town, and they left me in charge of Jack. I wasn't thrilled about it, but it wasn't like I really had a choice. They trusted me to keep an eye on him, and I figured I'd just keep him busy with video games, TV, something along those lines. But Jack had other ideas. He begged me to take him to the woods behind our house, the same woods we used to explore when we were younger. He wanted to play hide and seek, and I kind of reluctantly agreed, mostly because I figured it would tire him out and, give me some peace later in the day. We walked out to the woods, and he was really excited. He was running ahead of me, darting between trees, and calling out, "Come on, let's play." I didn't feel like playing though. I was annoyed, and I really just wanted to get this over with. So when Jack ran off to hide, I didn't bother looking for him. I just sat down on a rock and waited. I figured he'd get bored and come back on his own. After a few minutes, I called out, "Jack, come on, let's go home." But there was no answer. I waited a little longer, thinking that he was just being stubborn. I called out again, louder this time, "Jack, stop messing around." Still nothing. At that point, I really started to get frustrated. I didn't have the patience for this, so I decided to leave. I walked back home, figuring that he'd find his way back eventually. It wasn't like that we were, that far from the house. He knew the way to get back. But he never ended up coming back. Hours passed, and as the sun started to set, I realized something was definitely wrong. I should have gone back to find him, but I was honestly too scared. I didn't want to admit that I had left him there all alone in the woods, so I lied. I called my parents and I told them that Jack had wandered off and that I couldn't find him. They rushed home frantic and we called the police. There was a massive search. Dozens of people combed the woods for days, but they never found him. Jack was gone, just gone. And of course, my parents were absolutely devastated and pretty disappointed in me. I watched as they fell apart, as they blamed themselves, and as they kind of had the life drained out of them. All the while, I kept my secret. I never told anyone that I had left him there, that I had just walked away like the irresponsible sibling that I was. It's been 5 years now, and not a day goes by that I don't think about my little brother Jack. About, what might have happened to him. Did he get lost? Was he scared? Did he call out for me, thinking I'd come back? I'll really never know. And I'll never be able to make it right to my parents. I watched them suffer for years now, and they've never had the closure to see, what happened to him. They never ended up finding my brother, and they found some footsteps leading to a creek, but that was about the only clues that they ended up, getting. I don't know why I'm confessing this now. Maybe I just can't live with it anymore. Maybe I want someone to know the truth, even if I can't face it myself. But there it is. I left my little brother in the woods, and I never went back, because I was the reluctant brother who was not patient, and overall someone who shouldn't have been in the position to watch their younger brother at the age I was in. I've been living with this secret for over 3 years now, and I still think about it every single day. I've built my entire life around ignoring what I did, or more accurately, ignoring what I didn't do. It's not the kind of thing that you can just confess to anyone in your life, and I don't really expect any of you guys on here to understand, let alone forgive me for what I did. But here I am, writing this anonymously, hoping that putting it into words will finally help me erase this crushing guilt that's been ruling my life. I just moved into the city, looking for a fresh start after a rough breakup and a change in my career. It wasn't a dream city, but it was affordable, and I was ready for something new. My apartment building was nothing special, a dingy little block of flats on the edge of downtown. My neighbors mostly kept to themselves, which kinda suited me fine. I wasn't looking to make friends, I just wanted to do my job and come home to a quiet life. That's where I met Aaron, or rather, I didn't really meet him. I saw him in the hallway sometimes, maybe gave him a nod if our eyes met, but we never really talked. We looked about the same age, maybe a few years older, but he had this haggard, worn down appearance, like someone had chewed him up and spit him back out. His clothes were always rumpled, his hair was messy, and he always had these bags under his eyes like he never slept. But then again, I didn't think much of it. We all have our own stuff to deal with, right? It was a normal Wednesday night when everything changed. I had gotten home late from work and I settled into my usual routine. Microwave dinner, Netflix, maybe a beer or two. The walls in this building were paper thin, so you could always hear your neighbors. But most of the time, it was just some background noise or some loud television program that they were playing. That night, something caught my attention. A loud thud, like someone had knocked over a piece of furniture, followed by a groan. It was muffled, but I knew it came from Aaron's apartment. At first, I didn't think much of it. People drop things all the time. But then it happened again. A louder crash, which sounded like something heavy falling to the floor. I paused my show and I started to kind of get on edge of what happened. It didn't sound right. I muted the TV and I decided to listen closely, putting my ear to the wall. That's when I heard it. This low pain groan like someone was in complete and utter agony. My heart began to, race because I knew something was wrong. Every instinct I had was telling me to go and knock on the door to see if he was okay. But I didn't move. Instead, I just sat there, paralyzed by indecision. I told myself that it was none of my business. Maybe he was drunk, or maybe he had hurt himself, but he was already calling for help. I didn't know this guy, and why would I get involved in another person's business? For the next 10 minutes, I sat there frozen on my couch, listening to those horrible sounds coming from next door. I could hear Aaron moaning, gasping for breath, but I couldn't bring myself to do anything. I thought about calling 911, but what if it was nothing? What if he was fine and I was just overreacting? I didn't want to be that one neighbor who calls the cops for no reason and kind of make the whole apartment thing a scene. Eventually, the sound stopped. For a second I felt relief, convincing myself that it was all over and that Aaron was fine. But deep down I knew. I knew something terrible had happened and I had just sat there doing nothing. The next morning I could barely look at his door, and as I walked past on my way to work, there was no sound coming from his apartment. It was just this eerie, suffocating silence that I wasn't used to. I tried pushing it out of my mind, telling myself that everything was fine, that if something had happened, someone would have noticed. But when I got home that evening, the hallway reeked. It was this thick, sickly sweet stench that honestly made me gag as I stepped inside my own apartment. I knew what it was, and I didn't need to ask any question. It wasn't until 2 days later that someone else in the building called the police because of the smell. I stayed in my apartment, listening to the sounds of people talking, the heavy footsteps of the paramedics, and finally, the sickening creak of the stretcher as they wheeled his body out of the building. The official reports said it was a heart attack. They estimated that he had been dead for 2 days before anyone found him. 2 days, which meant that the night that I heard those sounds, he was dying just a few feet away from me, and I did nothing. I tell myself that maybe even if I had acted, it would have made a difference, that maybe he would have just died. Maybe he wouldn't have survived. But that's a lie, and I know that if I were to have gone, I could have maybe prevented him from dying on the spot. Every time I hear a sound or something in our apartment building, I always think of that missed opportunity, that because of my fear and because of my loneliness, I guess, I wasn't able to help him. I constantly think of the pain that his family's in to this day, and I really can't live with myself knowing that I was the one who overall ended this guy's life. This is something that I've carried with me for years, and I know it makes me a terrible person. There's no excuse for what I did. It's not like I was backed into a corner or had no other options. I chose to do it. I made that decision, and now I live with it day in and day out. I was 22 at the time, going through what I thought had been the hardest time of my life. I had just broken up with my girlfriend of 3 years after finding out that she had been cheating on me with one of my friends. I was devastated to say the least. To make things worse, I was also drowning in debt, working a dead-end job at a retail store and barely scraping by. My bills were piling up and my car was on the verge of being repossessed, and I was really starting to get desperate. One day, as I was driving home from work, I saw a sign that caught my eye. It was one of those handwritten cardboard signs that said estate sale with an arrow pointing down a side street. Normally I wouldn't have given it a second thought, but something made me turn down that street. Maybe it was curiosity, and maybe it was the hope of finding something valuable that I could sell for a quick buck. The house was old, the kind that had looked like it had been standing, since World War I. The yard was overgrown and the paint was peeling and the windows were dirty. It looked like no one had lived there for a while. I parked my car and I walked up the driveway. Inside, it was like stepping into another time. The furniture was old and worn, and the wallpaper had faded off the walls and started to peel. There were these tables set up with all sorts of things: knickknacks, old books, vintage clothes. The place was filled with people picking through the remains of someone's life, and I joined them even though I had no money to spend. I wandered into one of the bedrooms where there were these boxes of old clothes and random items. That's when I saw it. A small locked chest sitting on a nightstand. It didn't look like much, just an old wooden box with a rusty padlock, but something about it kinda, drew me in. Without thinking, I grabbed it. I knew it was wrong and I knew I shouldn't take it, but I did. I stuffed the chest under my jacket and I walked out of the house. I was convinced that someone would stop me and someone would call out, but no one even turned an eye my way. When I got home, I sat on my bed staring at the chest, wondering what the hell I had just done. I was never someone who committed crimes or stole, so I just felt like disgusting. After a few minutes, I forced the padlock open. Inside, I found what I had hoped for the whole time. It was cash. Not a ton, but enough to make a difference. There were maybe $600 or $700 in bills, tucked between old letters and papers. I also found a gold watch, which was probably worth a couple $100 if I pawned it. I told myself that this was it. This was the break I needed to get back on my feet. I used the money to pay off some of my debt, and I put gas in my car, bought some groceries. I did what you needed to do to survive. For a while, I convinced myself that it was fine. The guy who owned the house was dead. He didn't need the money, and no one else was going to miss it. I told myself that I was just taking advantage of an opportunity, that I wasn't really hurting anyone with what I had done. But the guilt started creeping in almost immediately. I couldn't stop thinking about the man who had lived in that house, how I had stolen from him. I started imagining the kind of life he had lived, and those letters and papers in the chest, what they meant to him. I didn't even look through them. I had been too focused on the money, but now I couldn't help but wonder. I felt so sad that I had been desperate enough to steal this man's belongings, that I couldn't have turned it into someone, or that someone didn't walk up to me and ask what I was doing. Part of me felt like I was meant to steal the money and that this was, something needed for my breakthrough, but it never sat right with me, and I know that if God or whoever gave me this money, it wasn't the right thing, and obviously I know I should have never stole it. A few weeks after the estate sale, I learned more about the man who had lived there. He had no family, no children, no relatives to speak of. He had lived alone for years after his wife had passed away. When he died, there was no one who had lived there. It was just him. He had no one to care for him, and he died a lonely life. The realization hit me hard. The money, the chest, even the watch, they were all that was left of him, and I had stolen it. I had taken what little he had left behind, and for what? To pay off a couple of stupid bills? I still have the chest buried in the back of my closet under some old clothes. I can't bring myself to get rid of it, but I also can't look at it. It's a constant reminder of what I did, of the person I became in that moment of desperation. I know I can never make it right. The man is gone, and I took something that can never be replaced. Maybe one day I'll find a way to forgive myself, but I doubt it. The only hope I have is going to God and asking Him for forgiveness, because I know what I did was obviously wrong. So if you ever think of stealing something or doing something wrong, just know that God is watching and that it's never worth it to do something, that was wrong deep down in your heart. That is going to be the end of the video, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you guys enjoyed these stories. I had a fun time making these, and let me know what you guys want to see next. I appreciate all the support. You guys have really been killing it. Make sure to like and subscribe for more videos and turn on those notifications because I'm be cranking out content in the next few months for you guys. So let's get it. Let's hit that goal. See you guys.